So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Labour are out of ideas and asking the regulators for help. This is probably the most embarrassing story I've seen in the last, probably in Labour's tenure, the last like 6 months or so. Wild that it's kind of come to this, and you've got this situation here. Reeve saying the UK turnaround, the economic turnaround will take a while. It's stuff we already knew. You can't revive an economy without people's purchasing power, which is what Prem is talking about. 16 million people live in poverty. Profiteering is rife. 1% with more wealth than 70% of the population combined. And so, of course, the economy is going to take time to revive, and for people to get purchasing power and things, the important things. But beyond kind of raising the minimum wage, which I think was a good move. I don't think they've done much else outside of that, to be honest, in terms of redistribution. And such. You've got a letter signed by Rachel Reeves and Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, with a letter to the regulators, the Financial Conduct Authority, saying more pro growth and to be more pro growth and more pro investment. And it's like a regulator is there mostly just to enforce the rules, force the laws around in certain areas. So, like, Ofwat's there to enforce the water rules, for example. So, if you think that they want to be, if your mandate for them is to be more pro-growth, what do you want them to do? Not enforce the rules, or to be more lenient? Are we forgetting 2008? Labour should remember that. Really, it should be burned in their brains, because that's what really caused their downfall in the end. And it did it for the long term. So I just don't get it. And they've sent this letter to healthcare regulators as well. What do you want, like, healthcare regulators to be more lenient on? There was a story today about Ozempic being linked to people having eye problems, and you just like this. This is what happens when you let through drugs, that haven't been tested properly. You can get gnarly side effects. It's just madness to me. I don't get it. The FCA is going to reply in the new year, just like this video will be out in the new year. Labour talking about an essential part of their mandate being, the government's pro-growth mission. It's like, sure, you can get, bad kinds of growth where all the money goes to the top and whatever. You do massive amounts of deregulation, investors make more and more money, and then bang, the system just collapses under its own weight because regulation is important. Like, there's a reason why, America does have stringent banking laws. It's because they know the damage it can cause. They were there in '08. They saw what happened. So did we. Like, you had Starmer in October saying, quote, "We've got to look at regulation across the piece, and where it is needlessly holding back investment, ellipses, mark my words, we will get rid of it," end quote. It's like, what regulation? Like, if you're talking about investment and things regarding that, you're talking predominantly around Solvency II. Like, what specific areas are you looking to deregulate? Are you going to do changing the rules around leverage, so you can leverage your money more in the stock market? Like, what do you want? Like, it's frustrating when you hear people talk about being pro-growth and we need to grow this and do that, such broad and vague terms. Be specific in what you want. And then at least that way the public can get a good measure of you, rather than being vague and pushing all of this work onto the regulator when this is not their job. Their job is not to be pro-growth. Their job is to enforce the rules. So it's just, this is cowardly. This is pure cowardice, because they know they're not going to hit their target of the fastest growing economy in the G7, because they seem to somehow forget that the USA is in the bloody G7. It's shocking. It's shocking. All this time to figure out a plan. They don't have one. And I just saw this thing where it's like, we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. Basically, Labour. And yes, it's true. I don't know if we've mentioned this already. Probably have done. But you've got the situation where the CBI sounding the alarm on the UK's economy. This from Bloomberg. Business activity is set for a steep decline in Q1 2025, survey says. It will be the sharpest fall in 4 years, piling pressure on Rachel Reeves. Headcount will be cut sharply, hurrying tensions at the worst since October 2020. CBI says the UK economy is headed for the worst of all worlds. Budget tax rises and putting the brakes on economic activity and hiring, survey suggests. All three major sectors expecting volumes to fall in Q1, which I think is relatively normal, that certain things will fall down just because quarter four is very busy and quarter one's much more quiet because people don't have money and sales are down generally. So, yeah, I think it's a Tory person here, MP, expecting a recession. Yeah, the shadow of his secretary. We don't care about what he's going to say. To be honest with you, Q3 there was no growth. Q4 growth is to be expected. Q1, I think we're going to see a shrinkage of the economy, and Q2, God knows what's going to happen in Q2. So you got the UK CPI inflation rate has crept up to 2.6%. Government's response: force impoverished people to hand wealth to banks and enrich bankers and shareholders. Real cause of inflation is profiteering. We've seen energy prices go up again. Based on what? Like what? I think the regulator should be able to say, why are you increasing energy prices, and should be able to look into increases in energy prices. And if it's not linked to the wholesale prices or linked to wages or whatever, actual operating costs, it should be forced to give the money back to the customers. That's how it should be run. You've got this clip here. I found this quite interesting.
People were talking about it in the pub. People were talking about it in cabs. And I think that sort of suggested that Labour is out of touch with the level of, basically, the public's patience has worn extremely thin, and I think they're not quite aware of that. They came in to say, we are the people that will do the standards that were lost under the Conservatives. But actually, some of those standards were maybe not even high enough. It's not enough to say, we'll go back to how it was. We need it to be better, and the expectation for Labour is very, very high. So I think
they did set those expectations as well. They weren't talking about £22 billion black hole and things will get worse before they'll get better. They were talking about fastest growth in the G7, and now it's I will get worse before it gets better.
Even a lot of their voters are feeling, do more, do better, be better than the other people. You know what I mean?
It's a banging Christmas jumper, to be fair. That is one of the best I've ever seen. It's a Raphael as well, so you'd love to see it. But she's right, the expectation was you will do better. You came in and you made that expectation. You didn't come in and say we're going to be as washed as those guys. And you've got Robert Peston being briefed on senior Labour figures and cabinet members talking openly about the prospect of Starmer not leading them into the next election. You've got some overly ambitious people, such as Wes Streeting, who I think will happily shiv Starmer in the back, just like he did for Jeremy Corbyn. And yeah, these people who really don't deserve to be there. You're talking about a Prime Minister who's deeply unpopular. The party that is, not doing great in the polls. And you can see a recipe for disaster, really.
I am literally staggered by the number of very senior Labour people, including members of the Cabinet, who talk openly about the real possibility, they say, of Starmer not leading them into the next election.
Wow.
And again, he got rid of someone who was very competent in her role in Sue Gray and put in an absolute clown in Morgan McSweeney, whose only knowledge is to fight the left. That's all he knows. That's it. That's all he has. He doesn't know how to do much else. He knows how to trick people in leadership contests, how to eke out a victory against a really awful opponent in Sunak. That's it. That's the scale of his abilities from what we've seen.
It's a massive talking point.
That is interesting.
It's a massive talking point. There are a lot of individuals at the highest level who have lost confidence in him. I slightly think this is sort of early Parliament jitters.
I don't remember this under David Cameron. Yeah, I was quite young when this happened. You've got Labour MPs kind of questioning the strategy and leaked WhatsApp messages saying, why would you announce the no compensation for WASP women over the holiday period when they know there's not going to be much to talk about in terms of news, and the media are just going to keep going on about it. It beggars belief. There's no strategy here.
The thing about politicians is, they love to catastrophize, all of that stuff, right? But for this to be a subject of conversation at the top of the Labour Party so few months after they've won a landslide.
They don't have a lot to run on. There's a couple of good things they got brewing. The workers' rights bill, the renters' bill. There's a couple of good things they've got brewing, but I don't think it will impact enough people to make that big a difference, especially when these are protections for people when they get into a bad situation. Ideally, the vast majority of people will not be in these situations to have to use things like the renters bill or the the new workers' rights bill. So I don't think most people will feel the benefit of it at all. It just doesn't make sense. And you got the news agents talking about Labour being asleep at the wheel. They're absolutely terrified of reform, and they should be, to be honest with you, because they're the ones that people are, I think, going to put their trust in next. Because they tried the Conservatives, didn't work. They're going to try Labour, and in a few years' time, they're going to realise, it doesn't really work. and they got the guy who's been waiting in the wings this whole time in Farage. And he doesn't need to win the election. He doesn't need to be the biggest party, but the more MPs he gets, the more he's going to shift the Overton window, and that's going to have a really big pressure on British politics, which is what he wants.
Be bought. I think that British politics, the top of British politics, ministers, are asleep at the wheel on this. I find the lack of urgency about this possibility.
They're talking about Elon donating a load of money to reform.
Quite astonishing and surprising. And I don't think Labour MPs are similarly asleep, by the way. I think lots of Labour MPs are really worried about it. But I find, although I think there are stirrings at the top of government, I find it surprising the extent of the kind of dormancy of it. We are, I think, at a unique moment where both the antiquated nature of our electoral law and the law that exists with regards to online media in Britain could come together, a confluence, a unique kind of coming together nexus, which means that we are at a point of real vulnerability for someone like Musk to come along with a lot of money as a sort of foreign agent, if you like, and try and buy a UK election, or if not buy a UK election, because the campaigns...
It's very possible he could pull a stunt like that, because when you have that much money, 100 million's nothing to a billionaire. It's not a lot. The thing is, I think Labour are quite complacent on reform, from what I've seen. And, you've got this caller talking about it's going to take years to get this country back on its feet, not 26 weeks. It's like, that's true. And you need to do some groundwork here, but Labour haven't done a lot. And I think the things that have got the most media attention, things like the winter fuel allowance cut, which is going to have a big knock-on effect on the NHS anyways. Labour are talking about we're going to put that money, the savings from the winter fuel allowance into the NHS. Simply not true, because there aren't any savings, because a lot of people have taken up pension credit. You can argue they've kind of reallocated the money better. That's a fair argument. The other problem is that there's such a big backlog in the to do the paperwork for the winter fuel allowance, because there aren't enough civil servants on the job. What that means is people aren't going to get their payments on time, and again, that's going to have a knock-on effect on the NHS. They did not plan this well at all. There's no savings in it, and it's very politically damaging. You can try and blame the media for that one. That's fine. But fundamentally, it's a bad policy. I've had relatives actually speak to me about it and say how bad a policy it is, because they don't think it's fair that older people should get hit like this. I for one, I feel bad about it, but, in my heart, I'm like, yeah, we should feel bad. At the same time, where were these people when austerity happened? They were absent. That's one of the things that does piss me off a little bit with some of this stuff. Labour's polling collapse is historic, but Farage has overseen a bigger one, and Reform are doing quite well. They're in the 20 points. I think one of the things is that the media kind of do obsess over Reform a lot. I think it's because it gets them a lot of clicks, a lot of views, and that's one of the reasons why they keep pushing Farage, because he does well viewership wise. At least I think that's one of the reasons why Question Time has him on. His availability is always good because he's got nothing else better to do in his life, and the fact that he gets good numbers. And that's the thing, it's media, but it's the media business. That's why people cover certain topics and they don't cover others. There's a reason for that, and you can get mad at Question Time or the BBC or whoever constantly platforming figures like Farage. These are the same people who won't cover certain topics because they don't impact their channel and be bad for monetization. So you can make your argument. That's fine. But if you're not willing to cover certain stories because you're not going to get views, how are you going to blame the media for constantly platforming a geezer who gets them views? When you do the same, you cover stories about Farage because it gets you views. It doesn't make sense. You got clowns like this, who again are going to push the Overton window, saying the Navy will be waiting in the water when the boats cross. Danger, do not pass that line. They're going to sink the dinghies. The Royal Navy said they're not going to do that, so I don't know if he's going to be piloting the ships himself. We'll have to wait and see. You got this more in common poll, which puts the MRP poll, which does a check of constituencies. You can see Labour dropping massively down to 228. That's obviously on the projection that if they hold an election today, this was what will happen, which Labour do have time to turn it around. But again, you got Conservatives on 222. And again, Labour's majority was very slim in terms of the way they won it. They have way more seats than they really should have if we had a good electoral system. But Reform on 72, that's gnarly. That's the bit that scares me, really. And you got, the poll showing Ed Miliband would narrowly lose his seat to a Reform. I imagine that there'll be enough Lib Dem voters to help push Labour over the line. And it's obviously on the predication that, that assumption I have is on the belief that the Tories will do this well in the election. I don't think they will, to be honest. I think their poll number will drop a lot more. That's the important thing. I did see a tweet actually. Have I got it up? I must have got rid of it. The tweet about a guy talking about, it's simple. People want better services, but don't want to pay more. Don't want to pay more in tax. One of them pro-Labour goons, like a journalist. Has no idea what he's talking about, but I think based on, if you look at specific polls, depending on the taxes people are asked about, that's where things change. So if we have a look, it's down here, right? So the top rate of income tax. So would people support increasing that? Yeah, you've got just over half supporting increasing the top rate of income tax. Corporation tax, people would be in favour of increasing corporation tax. The majority of people. You've got capital gains tax, which I think that's, let's see, it's quite close. It's near a majority, but there's obviously a lot of don't knows in there. High rate of income tax. So again, that's what 36 in favour of, 49 not in favour of. So that's quite interesting. So higher rate of income tax versus top rate. So you see the difference there. I think that means people wanting to increase income tax. Inheritance tax, more people are against that. That's surprising. And you got national insurance, which of course makes sense. People don't really, because that's going to impact lower earners. You got stamp duty, that's I think to do with housing, fuel duty, petrol price, basic rate of income tax, council tax and VAT. So you look at this, the idea that people aren't in favour of taxes being increased, not really true. It just depends on which specific taxes, which again makes sense because the majority of people aren't going to be paying corporation tax, so it makes sense. And voters feel like they've been lied to, with Labour. They More in Common did some polling work and things like that. So you had a focus group, I'll follow them on Twitter. Did a focus group on this stuff, and people feel like they were lied to regarding some of these things. Whoops, that's the wrong thing. All Labour have is useless, is one person saying, useless slogans that bear no reality to their actions. They seem totally out of their depth and more suited to opposition. A budget for growth, fixing foundations, ellipses, is all meaningless rubbish. A massive increase in taxation causes businesses to contract shock. That doesn't feel like that's a Labour voter, to be honest with you, like someone who actually did vote Labour. But, there are a lot of people who are very angry over this winter fuel allowance cut, which I didn't think would be the case, to be honest with you. But that's politics. Some things are surprising. Starmer, doing his new milestones and all that nonsense, and people just don't care. Stop announcing new things that you're planning on doing. Just get results on the things you promised beforehand. If your goal is to get the fastest growing economy in the G7, do that. Once you deliver that, then come back to the public. Stop announcing new this and that. No one cares. It's just marketing. And the whole 22 billion thing, they do blame that for a lot of the decision they made, which, again, Stephen Flynn was talking about that a long time ago. I can't play this clip because the music mix on this is terrible, but he was talking about it pre-election. So no one can argue that Labour didn't know the scale of the problem. Yeah, it got a little bit worse. It's probably a higher number than they anticipated, but then they also did do, which I agree with what they did, public sector pay increases, which added to the black hole. So, they obviously knew it, and if it was so bad, how could they afford to do the public sector increases without further borrowing? Don't make sense. But I think because Kemi Badenoch is such a clown, I think a lot more sort of reform will be the bigger problem.
I know how certain things might sound if they're not said properly.
Yes.
So I never have gaffes or,
She's literally a gaff machine. She was trying to take a dig at Starmer for having pre-prepared notes as she read off, as she sat down to organise her papers, because her questions were written down on paper.
apologising for something that I said, oh, that's not what I meant. I never have to clarify because I think very carefully about what I say.
You literally tried to make the argument that maternity pay means women have less kids. You don't think carefully, that's your problem.
Make sure that we don't sound shrill, that we don't sound like the bad guy.
And I feel like the Tories always sound like the bad guys. If there's a world where the Tories sound like they're on the right side of history, I'm nervous about the right side of history. You got this, waste of time. Starmer fumbled his first 6 months in power, and you got Joe Munkham, who's massively anti-Tory, saying there's a simple explanation: is they're a government without any principles, and everyone can smell it, which I agree with. I agree with this. Yeah, they don't know what they're doing. You know, you got Treasury Minister spending thousands of pounds on media training while axing winter fuel payments, and it's just like, first of all, where is this media training? Because I've seen their interviews. Their interviews are awful, absolutely awful, genuinely generationally bad in interviews, right? Like, you're spending taxpayer money on for you to get better at doing interviews, right? Which you do need the help, but you know, when you look at on the face of it, the decisions they made when it comes to the cutbacks, unless you're paying this out of your own pocket, I don't think you can make the argument that, you know, we need to have certain cuts happen when you're spending money on frivolous things. I don't get it. I disagree with it. I did see this article in The Guardian. This person argues, the Observer economic policy. There's no the Observer, the editorial report saying the Observer's view on the UK economy, don't despair, signs of growth are growing. Now I read through most of this article. You know, they talk about the minimum wage national insurance increase on businesses, things like that. You know, Reeves could have played a bad hand. She was dealt better. That's an understatement, huge understatement. You know, they talk about the winter fuel allowance here, while the refusal to increase excise duty on petrol and diesel was baffling. I mean, that's not a surprise. People would hate that if they increased those things. What they should have done was equalise capital gains with income tax. That's what they should have done. And I think that would have gone down quite well. First, Reeves' big call in the budget was the raising taxes. Money on that scale had to be raised if public services range from the NHS. The core system will not slid down to the abyss. They're not wrong, but again, they could have raised income tax, the old 50% tax rise. That's the argument I make about why, you know, this Labour government are not centre left, because Blair's government arguably were centre left, and they had much more progressive policies in certain areas, including the 50% tax rate, which Labour said they're not going to reintroduce. So you've got this, just a lot of filler here, a lot of filler. You're talking about business investment is like a cork in the water. The longer it's held below the surface, the more there's a natural productivity for it to bounce back upwards. I mean, what? Like this, whatever. But, you know, like business investment normally follows from government investment. So if the government aren't going to invest in things, businesses won't really follow suit. You know, they do talk about how you know, the UK is following like a public-private model. So in terms of infrastructure projects being funded by the private sector, or, you know, maybe they'll help build power plants with help from the private sector, similar to what I guess the SAP France had with EDF, where they're the majority shareholder, but there's a lot of private investment in EDF. But again, like, you know, they talk about pension fund consolidation, which again, you know, if you put all these pensions together in super pensions, yeah, you know, you have much more kind of purchasing power for shares and things like that. You also have much bigger disasters happen when things go wrong. It doesn't, and you know, you need deregulation to get these kind of super pensions anyways. So again, that's a bit of a ridiculous argument to make. You know, they're talking about more private investors coming in, which, okay, you know, the UK has always been a massive powerhouse when it comes to certain businesses, you know, stocks and shares. So, like, there's not much here in terms of things to be happy of, or green shoots of recovery. They've got pensions, sure, they've got, you know, the NHS is going to improve slowly, as well as the courts, hopefully. But again, 40 billion over, you know, two massive areas. I don't know if that's going to make that much of a difference, to be honest with you, short term anyways, because it's a one-off cash injection. That 40 billion, they're saying they're not gonna do that again. They're not gonna do that kind of increase again. So it's a one-off injection. What are they going to do to keep that up? I don't know. You know, and they talk about how there are many uncertainties and hazards ahead, not least intentionally with the inauguration of Donald Trump and the ambition of China and Russia. But such risks would face any government. Starmer, as his biographer Tom Baldwin notes, has started other jobs in his career unsteadily, only to complete them well. It's fashionable to cry the possibility he will repeat the exercise as Prime Minister, but good reason to suppose that he just may. So this is all hope and prayers in terms of some nonsense around pensions, you know, about the tax stuff, the one-off tax that Reeves did. Literally, this is I pray to God things work out. You know, you might as well have gone to any kind of religious building, a mosque or a church, and done the same thing. These are the most ridiculous arguments I've read. You got the whole editorial board to write this nonsense. I'd be embarrassed. Nothing. It's a filler article. No, if I was on the editorial board, I would not put my name to this. I'd be ashamed. I'd be absolutely ashamed. But that's it. You know, there's nothing here in terms of hope. Not really. They're begging the regulator really to get some growth into the economy. It's going to be through deregulation, because I imagine that the regulator's going to turn around and say to them, "What do you want us to do? That's your job, to drive growth. If you want to change the mandate for the regulator, which is something Jeremy Hunt actually wanted to do, then sure, go for it." But the similarities between Jeremy Hunt and Rachel Reeves is becoming quite scary to be honest with you, in terms of the fact that they're both clueless. They don't know what they're doing. The only positive is at least one's putting sub money into public services and the other didn't. That's about it. At least one's raising the minimum wage to I think a higher or near inflation. I think it might be above inflation levels. That's a positive, but that's about it. There's not much, there's like, in terms of the expectations they built in terms of the fastest growing economy in the G7, I'm just not seeing it. And again, I'd be embarrassed if I was one of those people who kept saying, I'll get Labour in, they'll change stuff and we'll push them to the left. But that's a different topic that I'll be covering on a different day. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.